Wouldn't mess with the mic for this small of a group, but they're recording it, so they need the sound. So we'll do that. My name is John Sliffe. This is the Enduring Word Museum. And with this museum, our purpose is to affirm that the Bible we have is true and it's accurate, and we can trust it as God's Word to us. And then emphasize that you have to read it for yourself and you have to study it. You can't rely on other people to read it to you, right? So a survey that I often mention was done in 2012. Pardon me, it's a little bit dated. But it was a survey of over 3,000 Christians, and 78% say they believe there's significant errors in their Bibles, but they don't know where. And so I often say that if you had your great-grandmother's cookbook, and it was this beautiful old leather cookbook, and you had it in your kitchen there, and you show it to people, and people say, well, do you cook from it? Well, no, I heard some of those recipes are terrible, but boy, isn't it beautiful, That's the way people treat their Bible. It's like, oh, this wonderful book of stories and things, but yeah, some of it's not right, so I don't really read it, Well, we want to answer people's questions and show them that the Bible is true and it's accurate, and there aren't significant errors in it, and it's exactly what God intended you to have to read for yourself, okay? So with that, this exhibit, we travel anywhere we're invited to go. All we need is an invitation. We don't charge to bring it out. We operate on donations, honorariums, that type of thing. We don't have anybody that underwrites our budget or anything for us. That would be great if anybody wants to. But it's just small donations that keep us going. I'm retired military. That takes care of my bills at home. Everything that comes into the museum here goes to tires and fuel and those types of things. Nobody takes a paycheck, okay? Let's see, what else? We travel anywhere here in America, but we also travel internationally when we have the invitation. We've been to several different countries with this, and we teach. Here in America, we teach how we got the Bible in English, but when we went to Russia, we taught how the Bible came to be in the Russian language, or we went to Belarus, we taught how it came to be in the Belarusian language, or we went to Hong Kong, and we taught how it came to be in the Chinese language, right? So, again, the goal is to show that what we have is accurate. Out on the table out front, we have some books out there. They're $30. It's the museum in book form. They're real nice books if you would like that. We have a donation basket out there. You can help us, support us. There's also a QR there you can scan, and you can do a one-time donation or an ongoing monthly donation. I would ask you to prayerfully consider that. We need some help with those small monthly donations. Help us carry the cost in the off months when we're not traveling, okay? So when we talk about the Bible in English, of course, you got to get back through the original languages and everything. So we start with archaeology. There's several pieces of archaeological evidence over there. In the late 1800s, skeptics started saying, how do we know that the Bible is true and it's accurate when there's no evidence these people really existed, right? The Bible's just fairy tales. There's no proofs. I was told that in the late 70s when I was a kid. The Bible's just moral stories, but not real. Well, some German archaeologists set off to find Babylon. They found Babylon, and some of the very first things they found were these big bricks, about 4 foot long, 3 foot by 3 foot square, and in these bricks was a cuneiform stamp, and it has a declaration that says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, and then it goes on to describe rebuilding the pagan temples to their god Shamash. And that's this one over here. we have two of these bricks. This one, I apologize. I said it came out of a much larger brick. You can see the saw marks on the back of it here where somebody cut it out of that larger brick. And they tried to smuggle it out of Iraq, and they got caught. And so the museum in Baghdad sold these as surplus, and we were able to buy a couple of these at Sotheby's through auction. It's hard to see with all the decayed straw and things in there. You can see some of the cuneiform markings. The amazing thing about those bricks is it's so much of what the Bible describes that Nebuchadnezzar was doing, right? It starts with the lineage that gives him the authority to be king, right? He's the son of Nabopolassar, the king. We have that in the Bible. And then it says that he was rebuilding the temples to their pagan god Shamash. That's all in scriptures as well. So it puts him at the right place, the right time, doing exactly what the Bible said he was doing. That's a big deal. So then as we work through some of these other things, I'm going to sit down because my knees are hurting, but I'm going to talk about the Pontius Pilate ring and this stone, the Pilate stone, and I'm going to talk about the crucifixion nail that's over here, okay? So kind of have that in mind. When I was a kid, I was, would that be about 8 years old, third grade, and I was going to a Christian school, a Lutheran school, and I remember the teacher told me that, you know, Pontius Pilate probably wasn't a real person. There was no evidence that he really existed. And that the Bible just probably added this guy to finish the story. And so I ran with that, and that helped feed that narrative in my brain that the Bible wasn't real, right? Well, little did that teacher know, the Pilate stone had already been found before, long before that, before I was born, it had been found. And the Pilate stone has Pilate's name, it has his position as the governor of Judea, and it also has the years that he served, and that all lines perfectly with what the scriptures say. The other part, you know, we talk about in the scriptures, it tells us 2 or more witnesses make a fact, right? So when I talk about these things, I try to talk about things that have at least 2 witnesses. So the second witness on Pontius Pilate is the signet ring, right? Everyone of authority had a signet ring. Somehow Pontius Pilate lost his ring, and they found it in an excavation on the interior of the wall surrounding Jerusalem. And so in my mind, I think of him walking along the wall, contemplating whatever was going on or was supposed to be happening, and maybe that ring was loose on his finger, so he was kind of playing with it on his fingertip like you do your wedding ring sometime, and I think it just flipped off and down into the weeds. And there it sat for 2,000 years until it was found in an excavation. But the Father knew where it was, and he knew we needed the evidence to prove that Pontius Pilate was a real person, right? So that was found in the late 60s, and it wasn't until in the last 2 decades that some graduate students took that out of the drawer at Hebrew University, and we were able to identify that as Pontius Pilate's signet ring. So we have 2 very strong pieces of evidence that Pontius Pilate really existed. Now, the other thing she told me was that Jesus wasn't likely nailed to the cross like the Bible says, right? That he was probably tied to the cross like the other criminals because there was no evidence anybody had ever been nailed to a cross. She was right in the sense there was not evidence yet, but that doesn't mean the Bible's wrong. Right? Lack of evidence is not evidence. So in the 90s, in a tomb in southern Turkey, they had found a pile of nails in the tomb. They're bronze nails, that's one of them. And in that pile of nails, as they were going through those, one of the nails was still embedded in the heel bone of a person. That was the first evidence we had that crucifixion had been done by nail. A couple of years later, there was a farmer in northern Italy that was plowing a field, and he hit what he thought was a big rock, and when he went back and looked, it was iron. And so he called the local university, and they came out and they pulled it out. And what it turned out was the area that he was farming, it was nice and flat. Well, it was nice and flat because that was an old Roman camp that he was farming. And so when the Romans broke camp, they dug a pit and buried everything they weren't going to carry. And it took 2,000 years, and that finally worked its way to the surface. When they started pulling that iron apart, in that they found iron nails. And one of the nails then was still embedded in the heel bone of a person. So that was the second evidence we had that crucifixion was done by nail. So was Jesus nailed to the cross? Sure he was, right? And now the evidence supports what the Bible has said all along, that Jesus would have been nailed to the cross. That was common for the worst of the worst criminals, right? So when we talk about archaeology and all that over there, my point of all of that is archaeological evidence consistently affirms the historical narratives of the Bible. What I mean by that is never do we find anything archaeologically that counters the narratives of the Bible. It always affirms. So it always puts the right character at the right place at the right time, doing what the Bible said he was doing, right? Every once in a while, there will be something that pops up, and they'll say, see, this one doesn't align with what the scriptures say. It shows that the scriptures have errors. And inevitably, they will come back, and they'll retract that, and they'll say, oh, yeah, well, that one actually does fit. There was a, what am I trying to think of? Hezekiah's tunnel. Right? Hezekiah's tunnel going into Jerusalem to carry the water in. When that was originally examined, they said, the experts said, well, yeah, that's Hezekiah's tunnel, all right, but the evidence seems to show that it was cut much earlier than Hezekiah, and Hezekiah just took credit for that. So time goes on, and there's some boys swimming in the pool outside the city there, and one of the boys went to the back where it was deeper, and the light was shining just in a way that it lit up the back wall enough that he could see an inscription on the back wall above the water line that was a dedication to Hezekiah and his genius for cutting in the tunnel and saving the city. And so when you hear of something that doesn't align with scriptures, just tap the brakes, give it time, they'll fix it, right? It will align because it's truth. Our Bible is true. The evidence will support that. When we talk about manuscripts in the original languages, we have Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew on the tables here. The Greek is actually back over on the last table in the archaeology. It's in glass. It's a piece of papyrus that is from Oxyrhynchus. It's a dig in Egypt, and it was the city dump for Cairo way back 2,000 years ago. And they have been excavating there and digging, and they have found over 250,000 pieces of papyrus there. The problem is most everything goes into the University of Cairo and goes into the drawers and never gets translated, never gets looked at. It would be an amazing thing if we could ever get those pieces out and have linguists work on them. I think we'd find some amazing things. Now, honestly, most of them are not biblical or anything important. There's lots of love letters. There's lots of grocery lists or thank yous, all of the mundane stuff of life. But 250,000 pieces, I bet there's some other interesting pieces of scripture in there that we would find. So that piece that's over there is not scripture, but it has Polycarp's name on it. So that helps to date it as well. That Polycarp was 180-ish is when he was born. So put him in adulthood, that's about 200, 210, something like that, AD. These other manuscripts here. So on the far end is a book, a codex. Codex is a book. What's the difference between I'll ask you this one. You ready? You with me? Okay. What's the difference between a scroll and a book? Yeah. So when you roll out a scroll, you write on one side of it. When you open your book, you write on both sides of the page, right? So that's the difference. It's kind of an interesting thing. Codexes in that part of the world came around in the 1st to 2nd century time period, and the early codexes are Christian writings. Did the Christians begin the process of using codexes in that part of the world? Seems to be, because the early writings are Christian writings. So that's kind of just an interesting quirk in the timeline. So in that book over there, that's from the 13th century. So it's almost 800 years old. It has Hebrew and Aramaic, and then, pardon me, there was a very famous Rabbi Rashi, and the commentaries in that are Rashi. It has the Cantor's note, or what are those called for the Cantor's? Huh? In the Megillah. Cantillation marks. There we go. So it has the cantillation marks in that, which I thought was kind of interesting. I can't carry a note, and I can't carry the rhythm, so it would never do me any good. But that's the Megillas is what that is. So that is Songs of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, and I'm drawing a blank on the other one. Songs of Solomon, Esther. The scrolls that are on the table, the first scroll that's on the far left for you, the dark skin is from the 12th century. That's on antelope skin. It's a fragment of a scroll. It's part of Exodus. It's the Songs of Moses is what that section is. The next scroll is from the 14th century. It's on sheepskin. And then this last one is from the 16th to 17th century on calfskin. These last two are complete scrolls. In the 1800s, again, when people were being skeptical about the reliability of the scriptures, how do we know? One of the things that they were questioning was when the reformers over here on this side were translating the Bibles into English and Belarusian and all these different languages, Spanish and so forth. At that Reformation period, the scrolls that they were working from were only a couple hundred years old. So the skeptics were saying, how do we know that what they were working from were correct? Even if they did their translations well, how do we know their source documents were any good? And so that was one more attack on the scriptures and the scripture reliability. Well, Yah had a plan for that. He gave us this discovery here called the Cairo-Geniza. A Geniza is a storeroom for old scrolls, okay? And so that room was a repository for old scrolls that came from synagogues all over the area. They were coming there to be stored. So when you work with the scrolls, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you'll kind of get the idea of it. With the scrolls only last so long in the synagogues, right? They're very much a capital expense. So they'll last 200 to 300 years in a synagogue with good maintenance. But the scribes have to continually touch them up and so forth. So on a scroll, each letter has to be properly shaped. It has to be complete. It can't touch another letter. There's some other rules. Sorry, my brain's kind of done here this afternoon. Should have had that cup of coffee about 30 minutes earlier. So when the rabbi is reading through the scroll, preparing for the congregation, and he sees maybe a letter is misshapen because the skin is kind of shifted a little bit with humidity or dryness or whatever. Maybe it's a little misshapen, and he wants the letter corrected. Or when you write on skins, the ink only sits on the surface. So when you roll and unroll the scroll, the ink can flake off over time, right? So he sees something that he doesn't like. He wants it fixed. He goes over to the column, the left edge, and he puts a little dot there, and it tells the scribe the next time he comes through, I'm sorry, I said left, it'd be on the right, something in this line needs to be corrected. And then when the scribe comes to town, he'll go through the scroll and he looks for those little dots, and then he fixes what's in that line, okay? I have this yod here pointing at one of the dots, telling the scribe something in that line needs to be fixed. It's interesting where that is. You'll see that there's been other repairs already done in that area where things have been erased and corrected. The scrolls they're such amazing pieces of history when you look at all the work that's being done on these over the years, right? That middle scroll that's on the sheepskin, where I have it open to, you'll notice on the right side, the text is very heavy. It's very bold. Somebody had a real heavy hand when they were writing. On the left side, it's very light and thin. On the right side is kind of yellowed over time and so forth. The one on the left is much whiter skin. These types of things. So what happened was somehow that panel got damaged. Maybe somebody spilt a lamp on it or who knows what, and it was too much to repair. So they had a couple of ways they could fix it. If the synagogue didn't have a lot of money, you got to fix it. So what are you going to do? You can go to the Geniza and find another scroll the same size and get to that panel in that area and hope that it's in better shape than yours, and maybe have the scribe clean it up and so forth. Then you can sew that in. That might buy you another 50 years with that scroll. Or if you can't find that, then you just have the scribe remake that one panel and sew it in there, and now you're good to go down the road a ways. So, but they had to be in proper condition to be read, and so this was part of the process. It's really a beautiful thing that in Sunday Christian culture that people don't understand it so much. They tend to be very proud of themselves when you read through your Bible the first time, or, I've done that twice. I've read through my Bible, And in Jewish culture, you read through it all every year, right? And so you get so much more familiar with the scriptures, and you learn so much more as you go. So when you choose the path then as a young man, you decide, I'm going to the path of being a rabbi or a scribe, and then you're really getting down to the studies of the scriptures and memorization and so forth. When you're finally out here with your scrolls, you know it like the back of your hand, although you're not allowed to copy a scroll by memory. You have to do it from copying another scroll, right? It's pretty quick to pick up a mistake, is where I'm driving with all this, right? So this little scroll, this one I open and close so much, I really need to mount it in some glass, so I quit doing this so much. But you can see right in the middle here, it's kind of darkish gray, and the one line sticks out a little bit more than the others, right? If you can see that, right? So over that way. Can't point at it. Where am I at? Right there. Okay. So what happened there or what appears to have happened, is the scribe was writing and he missed a word, right? Maybe it was late in the evening or whatever, and he missed a word, and he had to fix it, or at some point he had to fix it when it was caught. And you take a knife, sorry, I'm going to move here. You take a scribe's knife, and when it's dry, you can take this knife and you erase it. You scratch it off, right? But if you're not careful, you make a hole. So he made a hole. So now he's got to glue a patch on there. So you glue a patch on there, and you got to wait for it to dry again. And then when it's dry, you got to sand it so it's all smooth. So you take a little bit of sand with your finger and you kind of rub it, and you get all smooth. But now he wiped out the line above it and below it. So he's got himself some work there to do, right? My point is that when this, here's another patch here. There's patches all over these when they tear and they so forth. But over the years when the scribes are reading and so forth, they're always being checked and checked and checked. And a rabbi will go to another congregation, someone else will come and it'll be checked again and checked again. So when people say, oh, the scribes never made mistakes, sure they did. They're people. They did their absolute best not to make a mistake. But when they made a mistake, they're fixable, right? And because you have such a vast body of knowledge of scholars that are working with the scrolls, they're always being managed and taken care of and corrected and fixed and so forth. And that's how we end up with scrolls like the Dead Sea Scrolls we're going to talk about here in a second. 200 years before the time of Christ, never left Israel, and you can compare that to a scroll with a synagogue in China, and they'll read exactly with each other. It's a beautiful thing. And that one from China never has been to Israel, right? But that's how you end up with that is, to me, it's God's preserving hand by using his people and their skill set to protect his word, right? It's working together. I bought that little scroll fragment for like $30 one time with the intention of having it for kids to be able to touch the edges and so forth. And then I saw that hole in that mistake that was corrected. It's really been a great teaching tool, So, after the Cairo Geniza, okay, so I got way off track here. With the Cairo Geniza, when they found the Cairo Geniza in 1887, I believe it was two little ladies that found it and found it like it was lost. I mean, they're the ones that realized what was there and told the world what was in there. There was between 300 and 400,000 scrolls and fragments of scrolls. And it took years and years and years to catalog all this and figure out what is what. That scroll that's over on the end, the dark one, the antelope skin, that was found in the Cairo Geniza, okay? Those scrolls predated anything else we had by about 600 years. So when we compare those scrolls to what the reformers had to 20th century scrolls, they read very consistently with each other. Okay? Skeptics said, yeah, but what about before that? How do we know things didn't change before that? And God gave us the discovery at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Those scrolls then dated back to 2 to 250 BC, and when we compared those scrolls to the Cairo Geniza, so forth, all the way through, they read consistently again with each other. I use the word consistently on purpose because they're not exactly the same. They are 98.5% exactly the same, okay? There are some little differences. Nothing structural to our faith. Some of the differences are just linguistical development over time, some of these types of things. There's little nuances, but nothing structural to our faith. Right here is a manuscript page. This is a Latin Vulgate. That is from 1250. It's manuscript, so it's manually scribed, right? That would take about 8 hours of work for a scribe to do. Scribes were the highest paid profession of their day. So I tell people, think about maybe like high-priced lawyers today or doctors. That's where the scribes were at of their time. Okay? So if you wanted a copy of the Bible for your home, you better have some very deep pockets because you're going to pay this lawyer-scaled scribe to work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for 3 to 3.5 years to produce a single Bible. The cost was extraordinary, right? So most people could not afford to have their own scriptures in their home. Only the very wealthiest people could. We moved to John Wycliffe here, or Wycliffe, depends upon where you're from. John Wycliffe comes on the scene in the 1370s. By the 1380s, he's a very accomplished scholar, very renowned for his knowledge and so forth. The Black Plague has come back through England again and killed 30 to 40% of the population. And so society is really in kind of a chaotic state. If you can imagine that many people dying in your community, and the priests are going out to read last rites to the people that are dying or have died, and the priests are getting sick, and they're dying. So now you have chapels and churches and cathedrals all across England that have no one that can read a Latin Bible. So they've got the Bibles, but nobody can read them now. And so John Wycliffe thought the way to fix this is put the Bible into the people's language, into English. He asked permission to do that, and he was told no. English is the poor people's language, right? If you had any kind of upbringing, teaching, you would have learned Latin or French. So the people were very prejudiced about why would you want to teach those poor people a language? They're obviously too stupid to know how to read and write. Never occurred to them that they just didn't have access to the materials, right? So Wycliffe and his students began to translate the Bible into English using Latin letters and phonetically spelling out words, okay? Sounds easy. It's a mess because there aren't enough letters. Do you know off the top of your head how many letters? I'm sorry, you're the only kid that's in here right now, so I'm picking on you. How many letters do we have today? 26. At this time, they only have 22, and there's some important letters missing. One of the letters that's missing is a W. When you get a chance to come up here and look, you'll see this is 2 overlaid U's that make the W, right? Okay, we're a small group here, so I'll show you this. If you can imagine here, I'm going to put my finger here at a letter. It looks like a V, but it's very long. Can you see that there at my fingertip? Looks like a really long V, right? So he called that a thorn. So let me put this in the light where you can see it better. So it's in red, so who's speaking? Jesus, right? So it says, Our Father that art in heavens, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. What are we reading? Lord's Prayer, right? So it sounds very much like the King James Version of the prayer, but the spelling is wildly different, right? I use that amongst some other things when we talk about how language develops and changes, but we can be assured it still says exactly the same thing. So Wycliffe is an old man. He as this all gets really heated and going, the church wants to arrest him, but he's in a kind of a protected position where he's at. They can't just arrest him. He has a stroke and he dies. His followers are highly persecuted. And when they're out traveling and teaching people to read and write, they would teach them to write their own Bibles so they could learn. When they were captured, they would be burned at the stake, and they would hang the Bible around their neck when they would burn them. Almost 30-some years after Wycliffe has died, they finally get around to convicting him of heresy. And they go back and they dig up his grave. And you can see here, there's a coffin here, and they're pulling his bones out. They're burning them in the fire, and they're smashing them with hammers, and then they throw them in the river. And they were trying to erase him from history, but they were trying to keep him from experiencing the resurrection as well, because they believed if the body was too broken apart that God couldn't put it back together. That's kind of interesting, right? He made everything. He made us out of dirt, but he can't put it back together. Anyways. What's that? Yeah. So the most tragic part of this story is they went everywhere that he had taught, everywhere that he had lived, and destroyed his work. And so they burned all of his books, all of his writings, everything that he had done. And so when you get here in 2025, this is an extremely rare page, and this is to me really the crown jewel of this exhibit is this page right here. I'll tell you one more thing about this page right here. It's on vellum, it's on sheepskin. And tanning the skins and stretching took a long time to get them thin enough to where they would be like paper. It was an expensive process. If you were in a hurry and money wasn't an object, you could do it quicker. And what they would do is they would take the ewe that was pregnant and they would time it to just before the baby would develop the fur or its hair. And they would butcher the ewe and take the baby, and when they skinned the baby, they would tan it, and you would get 4 pages out of that very quickly. And this is that little lamb's skin right there. It's just a lamb. It's livestock. That's what they were for. Okay, so we moved to Gutenberg. And he grew up, his father was head of the city mint, making the coinage for the city. So Johann grew up doing engraving and all of these types of things. At some point, he tried a couple of ventures. He wanted to be rich. He wanted to be richer than his father. That was his whole thing in life. He tried a couple of ventures, and they didn't work out for him. And he had this idea of movable type. He's not the first person to invent movable type. There was a Chinese inventor about almost 800 years earlier that had invented movable type. But he had over 3,400 characters, and it was very cumbersome, right? So then along came a Korean inventor about 400 years later, and he invented movable type. But he had over 1,400 characters, and both of those guys used porcelain. When Gutenberg has the idea in 1450, he only has 22 letters to deal with, and he decides to make them out of lead. And so you could cast them and recast them very quickly, and that's what changed everything, was that 22 letters to deal with. So what he did is he was a perfectionist. He wanted it to be perfect, and he knew the scribes, when they did their work, like this one over here, paper was available, but if you wanted quality something, it would be on vellum, on skins, okay? And so he had to kind of change people's mindsets a little bit, that maybe paper was a better medium for what he wanted to do. He did do some printing on vellums, which is amazing, but so what he did is he went to the Latin Vulgate and he picked out the prettiest of each letter, A, B, C, so forth. And each letter, he picked out the prettiest looking one. That's the one he had his engravers engrave. So when he cast the letters, every letter was perfect every time, and the scribes couldn't do that, right? The other thing that he did is I have this. I have this extra printed page here. Up on the table is the original Gutenberg page. If you're not aware of it, you have to come up and see it. So this is a printed copy of it. And what he did is he spaced each line so you have perfect right and left-hand columns. And the scribes couldn't do that, right? And so they saw the ends of their careers coming on rapidly, and they were not happy about it. They got angry and they burned his shop down and ran him out of town. And he went down the river and he got another shop and started to set up again, but he was out of money, and he'd taken deposits on the Bible, so he had to deliver them. So then he borrowed money, and it was like a hard money loan, right? Borrowed it from Vito. No, I don't know who he borrowed it from, but it was a hard money loan, and they were going to come after him if he didn't pay it back soon, right? And he was such a perfectionist, he was driving the investors crazy. And they're just like, just print the Bible so we can sell them. And at some point before the Bibles were finished, they'd had it with him. They called the debt. Of course, he couldn't pay his debt because he hadn't sold the Bibles yet. He got kicked out of the company, and those other men went on to produce the Bibles and made the money. And they had a publishing company for over 400 years, all the way to World War I. Their publishing company thrived. Gutenberg, it's kind of a sad story. He was an alcoholic and tried other things. Nothing worked out. The city of Mainz, Germany, kind of held him up as a hero for inventing movable type. They gave him an apartment to live in, a little stipend of money. And the best part was they gave him a monthly allowance of grains and beer to live on. And so it was like medieval Social Security. They took care of him. But he died young as an alcoholic. I'm writing a book for middle schoolers on Gutenberg. And I'm like, how do I end this story, you know? And so I had really chewed on it, and the Lord really kind of revealed to me the life lesson in this, right? Johann Gutenberg had a mission to do, and his mission was invent a functional, rapid way of printing, movable type, right? That was his mission, and he did that. He was focused on the money. He wanted to get rich. And he got mad when people stole his idea and went and printed, instead of celebrating that this was God's achievement and this was going to spread his words, right? And so that's how this book is coming back around, is the life lesson. How do we look at our lives? What is the measure of success that we have in our lives? Is it monetary, or is it our service to the King, and how prosperous that is, right? So I hope it's well received. We'll see. Kids might go, what? You know, I don't know. Anyways, up here on the table is some letters. And if you want to come up and look at these when we're done, the letters are right here on the ends of these little pieces of lead. The letters are here, okay? These are more modern, but you get the idea of what Gutenberg was working with. This was the innovation, was the movable type. On the graphics back here, you can see the typesetters setting the type in the frames. They would proof it, and once it was proofed, it would go into the printing press. 2 people working together on the printing press could produce a page a minute, okay? So you go from 8 hours of work over here with the scribe to do a page to a page a minute. This was infuriating when the scribes saw this, right? So instead of producing one Bible every 3 to 3.5 years with a single scribe, now you have a team of about 6 people working together, and they're producing 50 Bibles every 3 to 4 months. This was going to change everything, right? If you had a minute to read the graphic back there on Gutenberg, normally those are spaced here throughout the exhibit where they belong, but I didn't have room for them, so I had to put them back there. But it talks about in the Netherlands, in the 50 years, so from 1450 to 1500, they had produced over 8 million books just in the Netherlands. And they were primarily Bibles. That's what people wanted. So those were Latin Vulgates that were being produced. It was a key piece of God's plan for the coming Reformation. We couldn't have the Reformation without printing shops all over Europe ready to go. Because once the reformers began to do their translations, they would go to print and they would be out to the people before they could be stopped, right? I don't know if I'm going to make it all the way on time, but we'll see how it goes here. I might skip a little bit of this. I do want to point out this guy here is Erasmus of Rotterdam. He was a colorful character, very checkered past. He was born the illegitimate son of a priest. He went on to be just a phenomenal scholar, studying Greek, and he collected every piece of Greek biblical writing he could find, and that would become what we know as the majority text, or Textus Receptus, is from Erasmus here. He wants to do a new translation into Latin. He asked permission to do that, right? He's got all these Greek documents now. He wants to do a new translation into Latin. He asked permission from the Pope, and the Pope says, no, we don't need that. No, that's not true. He asked permission of his supervisor, the Archbishop, to do it, and the bishop tells him, no, you can't do that. Well, he did it anyways, and he did an in-run on the bishop, and he dedicates the new translation to the Pope. And the Pope sees it and says, oh, this is wonderful, good boy, and isn't this nice? Well, he would not have been so happy had they realized that he found some of the translational errors that were going to spark the Reformation, right? He was criticized for that. He says, basically, I'm sorry, and he sat down and was quiet. But the book was published, and it went out, and Martin Luther then saw it. This got Martin Luther thinking, and a better understanding of what grace is, right? The difference between penance and repentance. We know the story of Martin Luther and his 95 Theses, all that sort of thing. Let's skip on a little bit more. I want to talk about William Tyndale over here around the corner. William Tyndale is the guy that translates the Bible into English as we understand English, okay? He was an amazing scholar. He was a theologian. His grasp of languages was just amazing. They say he spoke 10 languages. 6 of the languages they say he was so good at that people that it was their native language thought it was his native language, right? This is the guy God chose to give us our written language. So he is called to translate the Bible into English. He asked permission to do that. He's told no, and now he has to figure out a way that he can do it. So he resigns. No, he takes sabbatical time from the university, and he takes a job for a wealthy family as the family priest at their country estate. And he begins to work on his translations. Well, it doesn't take long for the church leadership to figure out what he's doing. They have him arrested and brought to the Archbishop's house. And the bishop thinks he's going to be able to sit Tyndale down and talk some sense into him and get him back on the home team. But the conversation doesn't go well, and it blows up, and Tyndale has to run for his life. He leaves England and he goes to Europe, and he keeps working on his translations over there. The church wants to find him and get him stopped. Initially, they just want to arrest him, but it quickly moves to arrest him and kill him pretty quickly. Every time he finishes a book of the Bible, he leaves it with a printer, and they begin printing them and smuggling them back into England. And now the people are starting to see the New Testament books first in their own language for the first time. He gets through the New Testament into the Old Testament. The bounty has gotten so high now that a friend ends up selling him out and takes the reward and turns Tyndale in. The friend is promised that no harm will come to Tyndale. He should have known better than that, you know. So they arrest him and they take him and they kill him. There's a picture around the corner here where he's tied to a stake and there's a man behind him with a rope around his neck and gonna strangle him. That was considered very merciful, that they were allowing him to be strangled before he was burned and not being burned alive. His last words are, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. And he's talking about the Bible in English. Why is this such a problem? Well, the Lord had a plan. King Henry VIII is the king at the time, and he is wanting a divorce from his first wife, Catherine. He wants to marry the new girl. He wants a son, and he's sure if he marries a new girl, he'll get a son. The Pope tells him, no, you can't have a divorce. Somehow, some way, the conversation comes up, and one of the bishops, a guy named Cranmer, and I can only imagine how the conversation goes, but it was something like, hey, if you split off from the Catholic Church and start your own church, the Church of England, put me in charge of it, I'll give you the divorce you want. And that's what happened. As he broke off from the Catholic Church, he put Cranmer in charge, gives him the divorce, and now he marries the new girl. Well, when he marries the new girl, King Henry VIII finally sees a Bible in English and says, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly what I need for my new Church of England. And he commands that it be printed and put in all the churches and made available to the people. That would become known as the Great Bible. That's the first Bible in English that's legal. There's an example of it here. I'm going to walk here real quick. This little Bible here is a 1552 that we just got, and this was the last year the Great Bible was produced. When Henry died, his son Edward became king. Edward was only king for a few years. He died young, and so when he died, when these were being produced, Queen Mary comes on the scene, and she says, all those Bibles in English have to go. They all have to be burned. We're going back to the Catholic Church now. Well, the Brits are very good about keeping records. So it was very easy for the church officials to go to the one printer in England that had the license to print the Bible and go see who bought Bibles from him, right? And so then they would go to those houses, and if they give us the Bible in English, and if they gave it up, no problem, it would be burned. If they didn't give it up, they would search the house, and if they found in the house, it could be anything from, the dad being beaten or thrown in jail to everyone being killed or somewhere in between. Unfortunately, lots of families were killed for the Bible in English. There is a page on the table in a frame that's a Martyr's Bible's page. That Bible, every page in that Bible tested positive for human blood. So that helps to tell that martyr's story that was happening in that time period. Oh, when Mary came on the scene, remember how I was saying that it was very merciful that they strangled Tyndale before they burned him? Well, the first one that Mary got a hold of the translators was a guy named John Rogers. And when they burned John Rogers at the stake, they made his family watch, and they say they kept him alive for 4 to 4.5 hours in the fire. So strangling was looking pretty good. Any of the theologians that could get away from England did. Many of them congregated in Geneva, Switzerland, under the under the leadership of John Calvin. He produced the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible is Tyndale's translation of the Bible, but he added commentary notes in the margins. So it was the first study Bible. More importantly, it was the first Bible with Bible verses. Became very popular. That's primarily what the Pilgrims carried when they came to America. I told you how expensive the Bibles were over here. They've come down so much now that a family can buy a Bible for their growing children, and it's about a year's wages. But you could pay and get a Bible for your children, and now they can learn to read and write. You have the Bible in your own language. One last thing, William Tyndale, his translation of the Bible became the standard. Everybody that spoke English learned to read and write from his translation of the Bible. He standardized our language for us. The verb, noun, conjugation, punctuation, limited punctuation, but all of this came from William Tyndale. Most people don't know that, right? William Shakespeare. Everybody loves William Shakespeare. Well, some people do. I'm not such a fan, but some people do. Anyways, he learned to read and write from Tyndale's translation of the Bible. That's why his speech sounds that way, right? Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to the King James Bible because we're just out of time and I don't want to keep you here. The King James Bible, when King James came on the scene, he was approached to produce a new Bible. The Catholics, the Protestants, the Baptists, the Anabaptists, the Puritans all said, can't we just have a clean Bible that we can all agree on? They tried to produce the King James Bible. He was not a fan. King James was not a fan of doing another Bible. So much so that when he commanded 60 of the best scholars of the biblical languages from the universities to do the project, to go to William Tyndale's translation and review it word by word, make any corrections that needed to be done, he didn't put any money to the project. He just told them they had to do it. And 54 of them showed up to do the work. They did an excellent job, in my view, produced an absolute masterpiece. Does it mean it's a perfect Bible? No, of course not. Anytime you translate from one language to another, especially into English, English does not have nearly enough words to describe the biblical words, right? But for what they had, I think they did an exceptional job that still holds up today. The biggest thing with it is no margin notes. All of the margin notes are gone. All those inflammatory notes that the Catholics hated are all gone. Now the only thing you have in the margins are cross-references or alternate words. Sometimes they couldn't decide that a single word gave clarity to what they were trying to say. So they would allow an alternate word in the margin to help give the reader more clarity. So an example of that is Psalms 1:1 there. It says, oh geez, my brain just went blank there. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. And ungodly is bracketed, and the alternate word is wicked. So they were saying, well, in the text it's saying ungodly, but for the reader to better understand it, we're going to put wicked, right? To me, they're really synonyms without a difference, but to the translators, there was enough of a difference, they wanted that in there. It kind of affirms to me how hard they were working on that, okay? I'm going to tell you one thing that I think is kind of fun about the King James Bible. It drives people crazy, right? The TH on the ends of words, right? Giveth, taketh, goeth, all this, right? I'll tell you something that the Shakespeare people hate to hear. That was never intended to be enunciated. It was a signal to the reader that it was an ongoing action. We don't have a way in English to describe an ongoing action. We have verbs, but we don't have kind of infinite verb, right? And so what they were trying to say when Jesus says, forgiveth, it's not forgive, it's forgive, right? When you giveth to the poor, you give to the poor. You don't just give, you give, right? And next time you're reading your King James Bible and you see that and you read it that way, it's like light switches going on. It gives so much depth into what you're reading. You'll enjoy it. So with that, I think I'll stop. I only overshot by 7 minutes. Yes?
So the difference
Originally, before the technology that we have today, they were saying that Tyndale, the King James Bible was about 78% Tyndale, okay? 78%. Yeah, that was before the technology we have now. Now that we have the technology and we can scan it and really dig it in deeper, more precisely, it's well into the 90% that it's Tyndale original. Less than 10% was fixed.
Is it just the evolution of language? More modern?
No. Tyndale says when he was doing the work, he basically says, I'm doing this under the threat of death. I'm doing the best I can, but I'm constantly moving and hiding and working and so forth, trying to stay ahead of these guys, that if someone comes along after me and fixes it, I'm okay with it, right? So when they fixed these things, it wasn't like restructuring or anything like that. In fact, they were not allowed to update the overall language at the time, right? So from the time of Tyndale to the time of the King James is almost 90 years, right? If we go back 90 years and read letters of our grandparents, sometimes they're hard to read, right? The language is different. This was already antiquated language by the time the King James came out, but they weren't allowed to touch that. They were only allowed to work on translation words, right? So.
And for Tyndale to come up with the Bible that he came up with, did he use Erasmus and Wycliffe's Bible? Like what did he use?
So John Wycliffe, when he translated into English, he used the Latin Vulgate, okay? Over here, when you deal with Tyndale and all these other translations, they are going back to the original source documents and translating coming forward, right? So Tyndale would have used some of Erasmus's grammars, but not the translation itself. He was still going to the Greek, right? Does that make sense?
So was that like readily available to whoever had the means?
Well, we didn't get into it in this lecture, but one of the things that's really interesting is when you have like the fall of Jerusalem, right? The sacking of the temple, the Jews are scattered. Some go east, some go west. Focusing on the ones that are going west, you go to Constantinople. Constantinople falls. They move further west. You get over to Spain, and this area you have the Inquisitions. They're being pushed out again. They move further west. They move further west. So they're getting into Europe in the late 1400s, early 15s, right? Is when they're getting over in that area en masse. And so now you have the Jewish culture with the scrolls and the grammars and all of this ending up over there for all of these guys going to college now and learning the languages, the biblical languages, right? So at the colleges and universities, they had all the materials. How Tyndale had access to that when he was running, I don't know. He had a lot of supporters. Were they smuggling him what he needed? I don't know. Yeah.
So really Tyndale should be getting the credit for the James Bible, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because sometimes I go to churches that are King James only, and it's like, I appreciate that. It's a wonderful translation, but why that one? Why would you pick that one as the one, So,
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Yes, sir.
The Cairo Geniza, where was that found? Where was the Cairo Geniza, and are there multiple ones?
There's lots of Genizas, right? The Cairo Geniza was in Cairo. I forget the name of the synagogue. It was, I don't remember if it's over here. It begins with an E. Ben Ezra Synagogue. And that just happened to be where the kind of like a central repository that all of the surrounding areas brought their scrolls to go. A lot of people think that Qumran was a Geniza. That's why all the scrolls were there. Most of the scrolls that were found were Second Temple scrolls, right? And so it would make sense putting them in the jars up in the caves, unaccessible. They're all retired, you know. So it's one of the theories why they were out there. Anything else?
Well, the Gutenberg Press brought the switch from scribes to presses.
Yeah.
I know the scribes were like devout men who was that culture transferred into printing workers. You know?
Yes and no,
Okay.
right? So the printers themselves felt like, you know, you have to do it right, right? So you have the proofers and these types of things. And you can see like over here on this King James Bible, that's a first of the first, right? That's a 1611, and there's a couple identifying marks in that tell us it was in the first 50 printed. Well, one of the things that was in that is they missed a letter in the book of Ruth.
Oh, yeah.
How long does it take to realize one letter is missing? I am so blown away by that. When I read my Bible, I'll see typos or whatever every now and then, but a missing letter, man, I could go right past that and my brain would just fill it in, you know? So that they found it and they corrected it. The church was still very much in control of the quality control of the Bibles, right? You can see that falls apart a little bit as time goes on, and Bibles are often produced very rapidly. Like I have a Bible, a 1658 New Testament that was produced for soldiers, right? That's the first Bible in English for soldiers, but it was pushed out pretty rapidly, and there's a couple of significant typos in it, you know? And so it didn't have the quality control, but this was the rebels fighting the royals. The royals had the priests that were proofing things. The rebels, the British rebels, didn't have that as much, so.
So you're trying to say that maybe change it more into being a business?
Yeah. 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 Anything else? All right. Well, thank you all for coming out. Appreciate it.